I'm not sure who else is joining us. Um, any comments? Any questions? How's the inner work going?
I have a comment.
Okay.
Last week I talked about the decision exercise, putting my pants on left leg first, and you had suggested switching the punishment around, and so I did. I changed it to basically jumping in the shower while the water's still cold, which I hate. And before even doing it, there was a noticeable change in like the pause before the pants, like just okay. And then there was one day where I messed it up and had the right leg in and was like, oh no, took it back out. So next time I got in the shower, I jumped in, it was cold. My body was miserable for 5 seconds, 10 seconds, whatever it was. And it hasn't happened again. So I'm gonna keep doing it, I think, for about a week and see if it continues. Yeah. And then I might switch it up if it really feels like, something's clicked.
Well, I mean, for right now, it feels like something's clicked, right? So,
well, I'm not sure if something's actually clicked or if my body's just being kind of sneaky about it. Yeah. The moving center just like, all right, I'll play along for now, but he'll forget, and we can go back to it. So I want to make sure I'm clear of that, and then we'll see.
Yeah. I noticed for myself, it seems like I'm spending an hour a day in more of a sleep state than I normally am. And it's like, what's going on? And then I realize that I'm spending that hour at the yoga studio, very mindful in the yoga, using up all that energy. And so I've got to figure out how to conserve more energy and expand it again throughout my day. That's an interesting observation for me, because when I'm in the yoga studio, and I'm doing, yoga studio, it sounds exciting, except I'm doing restorative and hatha therapy and joint mobility. And, when I do the Hatha 1 class, I can do about 85-90% of it. But then I'm 61 and my bones haven't really had this kind of workout for a long time. So that's my observation, that I'm really focusing very much in the moment when I'm, in the studio. I'm focusing on my bones, the movements of my body, my breath. And there it's actually wonderful because the instructors bring you back. They say, now as you open, breathe in, and as you close, breathe out, and as you move this way, breathe in and out. And so they narrate it, and it's kind of fun having someone else narrate it, because for so long I've been the one who narrates it to groups and people and clients, and so it's just nice to be in the receiver position where they can be instructing me in what I should be observing. But I've noticed that in the rest of my day, I'm not quite as mindful as I used to be. And I figure it's there's a certain amount of energy that we wake up with in the morning that we can devote to inner work and inner exercises. And I'm using some of my inner work there, which is good, but I want to ramp up the volume of my energy and bring it back into my life again. So that I'm not out suddenly halfway through my walking my dog, realizing that I've been just stuck in the words and picture maker of my mind and thinking about this and that rather than being present in the moment. Anyone else? Ahmed, how are you doing? How are things in Cairo?
Yeah.
Good. I think we lost Karen. Maybe she's in small town in Mexico. Maybe she has internet connection problems or whatever. Let me just see if anyone has sent any kind of message. No. We're going to do some inner work again today. Just give me a second. I think I'm going to do this on the screen so that I can follow along with it. Now, we have a head brain, we have a body brain, and we have a feeling brain. This is our own personal representative of the law of three. Now, we also exist on different levels. We exist on the level of world 48, which is the earthly plane. That's actually represented within me, within my head brain, my body brain, and my feeling brain. But we also exist at a higher level. The next level up, World 24. This is the realm, whenever Mr. Gurdjieff uses the word psyche or psychic, he is referring to this level. This goes back to, for instance, St. Paul in the New Testament saying, soma, psyche, pneuma, the three levels that we can exist on. Body, mind, and spirit is the way they're often interpreted or translated. But psyche and mind are not really a proper translation, more like our inner being, our inner self, our essential nature. And in tales and throughout the teachings, Mr. Gurdjieff will refer to the head brain, then he will refer to the intellectual center. So the intellectual center, the physical center, the emotional center are these three represented at the level of World 24, at the level of psyche, to use the Greek term, at the level of essence, to use another of Mr. Gurdjieff's terms. So, on the physical earthly plane, we have a head brain, a body brain, and a feeling brain. At the planetary realm, or the level of essence, we have an intellectual center, a physical center, and an emotional center. And then at the level of real I, at the level of consciousness, the awakened self, World 12, we have spiritualized parts. So they're really parts of one whole. But at the highest level of reality, there's God, the absolute, the unknowable, that we can't really even talk about. In Hinduism, they say this level of reality is 5 fingers more than we can imagine. So it's beyond any kind of conception. We can't talk about that level of absolute reality. But when the world begins to be created, so to speak, the universe comes into play, we can actually talk about the 3 initial forces at a very high level: the holy affirming, the holy denying, the holy reconciling. Sort of the true law of 3, the true understanding of the Trinity. And, in the Christian and Judaic Bible, they say that we are made in the likeness of God. And my understanding of that is that we have a head brain, a body brain, and a feeling brain. We have these 3 different dimensions to ourselves. But at the highest level, the holy affirming would be World 1, the holy denying would be World 6, and the holy reconciling would be World 3. And to my understanding, this is not in the teachings, to my understanding, this is the level that we can refer to as the Godhead. It is the divine as it exists in the created universe, right at the very top of creation, at the very top of the ray of creation. And it's the blueprint, the archetype for the rest of creation. So the law of 3 is operative in the world. So in language, I is the subject, ran is a verb that connects the subject to object, and there is the object. Some languages have I, there, ran, subject, object, verb. These are representations of the law of 3. We can find the law of 3 throughout. Whoops, just a second. Sorry about that. I think that's Aman trying to reach us. Let me see if I can get her a different way. Hopefully she can join us. But if Aman joins us, she won't be able to do it through Zoom. So we'll just see if I can get a hold of her. Sorry about that. So the law of 3 manifests everywhere. Okay. I mean, Aman, who's been a member of the group since the beginning, she actually, Sana, she's a fellow Syrian. She lives in Damascus. She's part of an international organization called the Initiators of Peace, and I've known her, and she ran the Ontario branch years ago, and she went back to Syria and got caught up in the civil war there. But she's right now trying to train facilitators to bring communities together. Iman?
Hi, Alan. This is Iman.
Can everyone hear her?
Yes.
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 Can you say hi, Iman?
Hi, Iman.
Hi. Hello.
Can you hear us,
Hi,
all of
Iman.
us, Iman?
Welcome back.
Did you hear that? No, she can't hear that. I know. Just a second. I've got to unplug. Now say,
Hey, welcome back, Iman.
Hi. Thanks.
okay. I've got it on my laptop, and Zoom doesn't work in Syria officially. But as I said, you know, Aman, when she was in Ontario and Toronto, she was connected to an organization that brought people from synagogues, Jews, from mosques and churches all together to recognize the humanity within each other. And she's trying to do the same now in Syria. Hopefully things are settling down. So we've got new members, Aman. I don't know if you've watched some of the programs online, but we've got, you know, someone from Turkey who is a fellow Syrian. Her name is Sana, but she lives in Turkey now. Ahmed, he's in Egypt. And then you know Guido and Ian. How are things in Damascus, Iman?
Things, thank God, are pretty good. We can walk without being afraid of, you know, like being targeted by any shells or rockets. So we're grateful for that. I think Syria is in a process of recovery right now, economically and probably politically. On a social level, I think life is, you know, like better than before. They were persevering. Now they're trying, you know, like to rebuild themselves again. So I think.
How's the training of facilitators? Because that's what, last time I talked to you, you were training facilitators for the International Center of Peace that's based in Switzerland.
Yeah. Well, I'm still trying, I'm still working on training them. But hopefully in January, we're going to have an official training run by an English facilitator who's going to also help them being trained officially, where they can be certified to be able to run these circles.
Mm-hmm.
So we're working on that as well, hopefully in January, beginning of January.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we haven't had Iman join us for a while, so it's. And as I said, I've known Iman in real life. She lived in Toronto for quite a few years. So wonderful person, very devoted to peace and connecting to peace. Everything that I've just been saying in terms of the law of three, that we're a reflection of the law of three, with our head brain, body brain, and feeling brain. This law of three is like the blueprint of the universe. The law of three within the Gurdjieffian tradition is expressed in a number of prayers. One of the prayers is wholly affirming, wholly denying, wholly reconciling. Transubstantiate in me for my being. Another one is holy God, which is the positive, holy firm, which is the negative, holy immortal, which is the reconciling, have mercy on us. And another one is sources of divine rejoicings, that's the positive, revolts, that's the negative, and sufferings. That's the equalizing. Direct your actions upon us. So these are three, they're actually the same prayer in terms of wholly affirming, wholly denying, wholly reconciling, or holy God, holy firm, holy immortal, or sources of divine rejoicings, revolts, and sufferings. And I've got these exercises recorded online, and I'm going to share them. I'm going to bring it up onto my screen and share the computer sound. So before I begin, you know, as I've talked about before, there are 3 lines of work. I'm just going to turn some microphones off. So we have 3 lines of work. So to think about that when we do inner work, we're doing it for ourselves, for our fellow human beings, and for the earth herself. The octave of food, the eating, our physical body doesn't really belong to us. Our physical body belongs to the earth. Every 6 months, our physical body is basically reborn and new. Every cell is replaced. Our emotional body, our essence, our self in the planetary realm, that's our human self that we share with our fellow human beings. And then at the level of the real I, at the higher place, that's where we have our individuality. So by working along and acknowledging these 3 lines of work, we recognize that we are more and that we are connected on many different levels to the universe. So, you know, I do this work for myself. I do this work for my fellow human being, and I do this work for the earth herself. And hopefully,
Wholly affirming,
just a second.
wholly denying,
Can we hear this?
wholly reconciling,
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to just start it over again.
wholly affirming,
And this is a 60 joint exercise,
wholly denying,
going through the joints in the hands and the fingers.
wholly reconciling. Transubstantiate in me for my being. This is the 60 bone exercise. Become aware of all 3 bones in each finger and toe, and repeat a line from the wholly affirming prayer in the following sequence. Wholly affirming, wholly denying, wholly reconciling. Transubstantiate in me for my being. Wholly affirming, wholly denying, wholly reconciling. Transubstantiate in me for my being. Wholly affirming, wholly denying, wholly reconciling. Transubstantiate in me for my being. Wholly affirming, wholly denying, wholly reconciling. Transubstantiate in me for my being. Wholly affirming, wholly denying, wholly reconciling. Transubstantiate in me for my being. wholly affirming, wholly denying, wholly reconciling, transubstantiate in me for my being, wholly affirming, wholly denying, wholly reconciling, transubstantiate in me for my being, wholly affirming, wholly denying, wholly reconciling, transubstantiate in me for my being, wholly affirming, wholly denying, wholly reconciling, transubstantiate in me for my being, wholly affirming, wholly denying, wholly reconciling, transubstantiate in me for my being, wholly affirming, wholly denying, wholly reconciling, transubstantiate in me for my being, wholly affirming, wholly denying, wholly reconciling, transubstantiate in me for my being.
So this is the holy affirming done through the 60 bones in the, or 60 bones in the fingers and toes. This came from a student of Mr. Gurdjieff's, Paul Beidler, who had a group that met at Northern Forest in Pennsylvania. He recommended that we do the 60 bone exercise, and we did it 3 times there, that we do it when we wake up in the morning. It's very important, as I've talked about, to become aware of our fingers and toes and to be able to differentiate between them. This is where Mr. Gurdjieff said that we receive influences from the universe. They come in through our hands and our feet. Now we're going to do the 12 or the 10 bone illumination exercise. Holy God, holy firm, holy immortal. Just give me a second. And I will have to bring this up on the screen. And this one is one that we can actually do sitting. We can even do this one when we walk. And, you know, you can adjust the prayers, particularly for those of you who are Muslim. If there is an affirming aspect of God, a negating aspect of God, a reconciling aspect of God, these are all different aspects of the divine, different names of the divine, to work with them. But this one, holy God, holy firm, holy immortal, have mercy on us. and it works through the joints in our limbs. So we start with the right leg, the lower right leg, the two bones, and to try to imagine as well that there's a certain degree of illumination in those bones. So I'm going to start this one now.
Holy God, holy firm, holy immortal, have mercy on us. Say the words, sense your bones, and visualize your marrow illuminating. Practice this exercise when walking, sitting, or lying down. Holy God, holy, firm, holy, immortal, have mercy on us. Holy God, holy, firm, holy, immortal, have mercy on us. Holy God, holy, firm, holy, immortal, have mercy on us.
Okay. So, whoops. That's the holy God, holy firm, holy immortal. And these we should memorize so that we don't necessarily have to do them while watching or viewing them. I'm doing this because I know there are people who are starting to find these videos online, and I want to make sure they understand how to do them properly. And we're going to do now we're going to do the 12 joint exercise. Now let me just set this up and I will explain it. So we start with the joint in the right wrist, the wrist joint, then we move to the elbow joint, and then the shoulder joint, and then the left hip joint, the left knee joint, the left ankle joint, the right ankle joint, the right knee joint, the right hip joint, up to the left shoulder joint, the left elbow joint, and the left wrist joint. And this is an exercise that really is designed to do when we're out moving. And to set it up slightly, Mr. Gurdjieff said that we have 3 centers, 3 brains, 3 parts of ourself. And each one of these is like a watch with a spring. And when the spring unwinds, that center dies. And I know my mother died by a third. Her head brain went first. She started to develop dementia about 6 or 7 years before her body died. He said that this is a problem within the world, that we can die by thirds. So our mental body can die, our physical body can die, our emotional center can die, and we then become almost like 2 brain beings. And the way to stop this is to introduce a regulator. And a regulator is where we bring at least 2 of our centers together at the same time. So all of these exercises that we've been doing have been regulators. To become aware of the bones in my hand, that's the sensation of my body brain, as well as the affirmation and the words from my head brain. So whenever we do exercises like these 3 that we're doing today, we're actually introducing a regulator and slowing down, so to speak, the aging process. So when you're out there walking and you're just trapped in the words and pictures and you're not thinking and you're not aware of your body, you can become aware of your body. You can become aware of the movements of your body. You can begin to sense your body. But when we add the prayer to specific points in our body, this is like adding a regulator. So learn this exercise, and then when you're out walking, you can do this exercise while you're walking. And this exercise can be done one of 2 ways. I'm doing the sources prayer, but we can also use the holy affirming prayer, because there are 12 words in that prayer. So we can go holy, affirming, holy, and then to the left hip denying, and work through our body. On my website, I've got both versions, but these are just, to take this out into the world. So just having set that up, sources of divine, and rejoicings is the positive, revolts is the negative, and sufferings is the equalizing.
Sources of divine rejoicings, revolts, and sufferings, direct your actions upon us. This is a walking exercise, though it can be done when sitting. Bring your attention to each joint and silently repeat the word. Sources of divine rejoicings, revolts, and sufferings, direct your actions upon us. Sources of divine rejoicings, revolts, and sufferings, direct your actions upon us. Sources of divine rejoicings, revolts, and sufferings, direct your actions upon us.
So as you've noticed, I've done each of these ones 3 times. 3 is a very big, within a lot of different mystical traditions, 3 is important. So to do everything 3 times. The collected state exercise. I don't know, I've got that somewhere, maybe I don't. Just give me a second. I've just had, a number of people who have started emailing me out of the blue saying they're watching these meetings. And we're going to do the collected state, which we've done before. And this, I'm going to say this collected state that I'm going to bring up on the screen is virtually Mr. Gurdjieff's words from an exercise that he gave in 1944 when he was in Paris to one of his students. Just a slight little bit of minor editing on my part, not a lot. It's really what he told the student. So the collected state exercise, and we've done this before. And this is where it's from, meeting 29, Thursday, August 3rd, 1944, the uncensored version. And he called it the first exercise for remembering
You
yourself.
represent to yourself that you are surrounded by an atmosphere. Like the earth, you also have an atmosphere, which surrounds you on all sides for a meter more or less. In the atmosphere, the associations, the thoughts produce waves. It concentrates at certain places, it recedes. It has movements according to the direction which you impart to it. This depends on the movement of your thought. Your atmosphere is displaced in the direction in which your thought goes. If you think of your mother, who is far away, your atmosphere moves towards the place where your mother is. When you do this exercise, you represent to yourself that this atmosphere has limits. For example, 1.5 meters, shall we say? Then you concentrate all your attention on preventing your atmosphere from escaping beyond the limit. You do not allow it to go further than 1 meter or 1.5 meters. When you feel your atmosphere quietened, without waves, without movement, then with all your will, you suck it into yourself. You conserve yourself in this atmosphere. You draw it consciously into yourself. The more you can, the better it is. To start with, It is very tiring.
Okay, so imagine that we have an atmosphere surrounding ourselves, a meter, more or less. Keep it calm, keep it still, keep it quiet. And not only can we disturb it with our thoughts, Mr. Gurdjieff said we can also disturb it with our feelings and with our sensations. And so after we do any inner work where we're quiet, such as the morning sitting, we should then enter into the collected state and become aware that we are surrounded by an atmosphere and keep it tranquil, calm, and still. And I'm going to count to 3. And on the count of 3, breathe it into ourselves. And then as we breathe out, imagine, represent to ourselves that a part of this atmosphere stays within us to help grow our being. 1, 2, 3. Breathe it in. And then as we breathe out, imagine a part of it remains within ourselves. And it's always good to finish inner work with exercise, with an affirmation. So repeat after me. May results from this exercise be transubstantiated within me for my being. And as we've talked about before, transubstantiate is really a fancy word for transform, but transforming in a very real way. So, wholly affirming, wholly denying, wholly reconciling, transubstantiate in me for my being was the prayer that we did for the 60 bone fingers and toes exercise. So we're asking the highest levels of reality, the highest hydrogens, the highest dimension in the created universe to come in and transubstantiate and manifest themselves within us. Everything is here. What is here is everywhere. Or what is here is everywhere, what is not here is nowhere. So the highest molecules, the highest particles of the universe surround us, but we're not normally able to connect with them. We're not normally able to interface with them because they're so far beyond our level of reality. When Mr. Gurdjieff said that the higher centers are all operational, but we are unable to connect to them, it's because the higher centers are fueled by these higher energies. The higher intellectual center is fueled by hydrogen 6. If you've read In Search of the Miraculous, hydrogen 6 is the same energy as the holy denying, which is also what we called in one of the exercises, holy firm, and what we called in the other exercises, sources of divine, not rejoicings, but revolts. So, those are all 3 representations of the same level where the higher intellectual center exists. And that means when we actually tap into the higher intellectual center, it's like we're tapping into the mind of the universe. It's beyond our brain. It's beyond what's within us. We're tapping into this energy that connects us with a deeper understanding of the interrelatedness of the universe. Now today, what I wanted to talk about, I want to work through these teachings in a very specific way. So today, what I wanted to discuss, let me just, I've got to try and adjust this. What I wanted to discuss was self-observation. 2 weeks ago, I talked about the need to become aware of our own insignificance, to become aware of our nothingness, our no-thingness. And the biggest distortion that prevents us from doing that is our ego. and particularly the twin sentinels, which are protectors for normal people of Monsieur Self-Love and Madame Vanity. And, there's conceit and arrogance and various other manifestations of the ego. But the ego is like this prism that turns reality around inside of ourselves. So we think in terms of me, and we puff ourselves up into this belief that we are very important and, we are worthy of respect and all sorts of things, internal considering, and our negative emotions are all aspects of our ego. And so to see the taint of our ego in our life, to see how our ego rules ourselves is very important, and to step beyond that, to recognize our own insignificance. However, the next step beyond our own insignificance is to begin to engage in the process of self-observation. And I'm going to bring up a quote from In Search of the Miraculous, where P.D. Ouspensky is quoting Mr. Gurdjieff talking about self-observation. So self-observation. The chief method of self-study is self-observation. Without properly applied self-observation, a man will never understand the connection and the correlation between the various functions of his machine, will never understand how and why on each separate occasion everything in him happens. But to learn the methods of self-observation, of right self-study, requires a certain understanding of the functions and characteristics of the human machine. Thus, in observing the functions of the human machine, it is necessary to understand the correct divisions of the functions observed, and to be able to define them exactly and at once. And the definition must not be verbal, but an inner definition, by taste, by sensation, in the same way as we define all inner experiences. Now, there's more to this quote, but I'm going to explain a little bit about it. In this paragraph, you see the word close to the top, self-observation and self-study. Be aware that in Search of the Miraculous and in other texts, whenever there's the word self with a hyphen preceding something else, this is actually a World 24 phenomenon. It's a higher order phenomenon than our mechanical self. So every act of self-observation is really an act of mindfulness, and it also requires a higher energy. A machine is incapable of observing itself. When we are in a machine-like state, we are unable to observe ourselves. But if we wake up to the level of personal consciousness, we become mindful, we can actually take a snapshot of what our state was in the millisecond before we did that. So we can become aware by taking these snapshots, by stepping up into the mindful state of our organism in the mechanical state. This is also why group work can be very important, because we may be in the mechanical, machine-like state, and the person sitting next to us in the mindful, personally conscious state, and they can see something in us and point it out to us. And they can observe it in a way we cannot observe, because we're in that mechanical, machine-like state. This is also where being involved, having a partner, even if they are not in the work, our partners can see aspects and dimensions of ourselves that we cannot see. Housemates, people we live with, they can provide the material for understanding ourselves that we can't really acquire, because they can be in that state where they step up into the mindful state and go, look, you're being angry again, or you're doing this again, or you're doing that again. So in that context, being involved, with a partner, or, living with a group of people, or being involved with a group, or even having friends point out things to us, can really help to accentuate our levels of self-observation. And then also here, down at the bottom of the paragraph, he says, we have to learn to define exactly the division of these functions, but it must not be a verbal definition. In other words, we've got our head brain, and he, in the first chapter from the author in Beelzebub Tales, he talks about mentation by thought and mentation by form. Mentation by thought is the verbal, linguistic part of our brain, the part that engages in self-talk and, oh, look, a bird, oh, look, my knee. And it's not the verbal definition, it's more of an internal awareness, an inner definition. So here he says by taste, by sensation. In the same way we define all inner experiences. Here we're actually stepping up to a higher function of our mind. We're moving more into mentation by form, where rather than getting caught up in the linguistic verbal words used, we are moving to a deeper form of awareness, a deeper intelligence. There are two methods, now to continue, there are two methods of self-observation. Analysis, or attempts at analysis, that is, attempts to find the answers to the questions, upon what does a certain thing depend, and why does it happen? And the second method is registering, simply recording in one's mind what is observed at the moment. Self-observation, especially in the beginning, must on no account become analysis or attempts at analysis. Analysis will only become possible much later, when a man knows all the functions of his machine and all the laws which govern it. So here he's saying that at the beginning we should really just be trying to take as many snapshots of ourselves, as many little inner recordings or photographs of ourselves as possible. And when we accumulate enough of these observations, we can begin to put them together into a specific order and begin to analyze them at a deeper level. Years ago, I was in the country and I went into this cupboard. It was a big cupboard and it had a light in the cupboard hanging down from a cord, and you turn the light on and off. And the door of the cupboard was shut, and I looked at the light and I turned it off. And for a millisecond after, the image of the light bulb remained in my mind before I entered into the darkness. I was actually doing it because I wanted to see what it was like to be in total darkness. But I noticed the image just lingered for a fraction of a second. And then I realized that when I engaged in self-remembering, in whatever limited way I did, maybe even it was just self-sensing, an awareness of my body or an awareness of my emotions, but at the mindful level, whenever I stepped up into World 24, into that realm of personal consciousness, it was like turning that light off and having the image of the light bulb remain in my mind. Whenever I self-remembered or brought myself back into this level of personal consciousness, this awareness in the moment, it was like the state that I was in was, I captured a recording, just a tiny snapshot of that state. And so when he's talking about the difference between analysis and mere observation, this is the level of observation. And later on in A Search of the Miraculous, he talks about how we have to take thousands and perhaps tens of thousands of these snapshots before we can begin to put them together into a meaningful fashion. But just to try to take these snapshots. For instance, right now, try to take a snapshot of the muscles in your face. and try to be aware perhaps of what emotion lay behind these muscles in your face. A lot of our emotional response to the world is in our face. So if we can take these snapshots, and if we can take more of these snapshots, we can begin to build up a picture of where we hold certain emotions. Try to take a snapshot of your body right now. Try to take a snapshot of your spine. Be aware of, were you holding your spine straight? Was it bent? Become aware of your posture. Try to take a snapshot of your breathing. Were you breathing? Notice your breathing. Were you breathing from the deep diaphragm? Or were you breathing from sort of higher up in your lungs and it was a more shallow breath? So there are these two types of self-observation. One is pure observing and the other is an attempt to analyze it. Now, Mr. Gurdjieff has said that we should not attempt to interfere with the machine when we first begin observing it. But then he also said that observing and the act of self-observation will necessarily begin to change things, because he said it's like shining a light on us, and the light will have an effect. And by this, he actually means that every act of self-observation, every act where we bring our awareness and attention back to ourselves, we're actually stepping up to World 24. We're stepping up to the realm of personal consciousness, of mindful awareness, and then we're looking back down at us. And that is like a light, and that will necessarily begin to change things. Even though he says we should on no account attempt to change things at the beginning, just engaging in the act of self-observation will shine a light on certain functions, and there will be a certain degree of change that results simply from shining this higher light on this lower dimension of our being. Now, getting back to the text, in trying to analyze some phenomenon that he comes across within him, a man generally asks, what is this? Why does it happen in this way and not in some other way? And he begins to seek an answer to these questions, forgetting all about further observations, becoming more and more engrossed in these questions. He completely loses the thread of self-observation, and he even forgets about it. Observation stops. It is clear from this, actually that should be this, that only one thing can go on, either observation or attempts at analysis. Here he's talking about the tyranny of the head brain, particularly the formatory center, which thinks in words. So the words that constantly circle around our head are associations of the formatory center. And even though we may think we're thinking, what is this? Why does it happen in this way and not some other way? By using and introducing that verbal part of the brain, the words, we're actually stepping back into a more sleep-like state. We're lowering our energy, and we're not able to engage in self-observation when we begin this verbal analysis. So we have to analyze, we have to look at it from a higher part of the brain than that formatory, verbal, linguistic part of the brain with the words that circle around in our mind. Whoops. But apart from this, and I'm going back to the text, attempts to analyze separate phenomenon without a knowledge of general laws are a completely useless waste of time. Before it is possible to analyze even the most elementary phenomenon, a man must accumulate a sufficient quantity of material by means of recording. Recording, that is, the result of a direct observation of what is taking place at a given moment, is the most important material in the work of self-study. When a certain number of records have been accumulated, and when, at the same time, laws to a certain extent have been studied and understood, analysis becomes possible. So I just mentioned, every time we observe ourselves, we're actually creating a little impression, a higher order memory that exists within us in World 24, in the level of mindful awareness, in the realm of personal consciousness. But we need to accumulate a sufficient number of these photographs, these recordings, in order to put them together and to begin to see ourselves in a different fashion. As a machine, when we're in the machine-like state, we are incapable of observing ourselves. The moment we engage in self-observation, we're stepping up to the next order, the next level. And so we're stepping out of that machine-like state. And so we can only take a tiny photograph or picture or recording of what we were in that state. And by stepping into the state of self-observation, we are shining a light on the lower centers, and they change slightly. So this is a lengthy process, something that we must embark upon and engage in over a lot of time. Now, there are shortcuts to this. I'll get into them later, probably not today, but shortcuts such as, what is your dominant negative emotion? When you think about yesterday, were you angry? Were you fearful? Were you despairing? If you think about, the emotion that you experienced, and this is something Mr. Gurdjieff talked about to Catherine Hulme, that she recorded in conversations with Gurdjieff, that, when you wake up, is there a negative emotion when you wake up? What is that negative emotion? Is that negative emotion a defining negative emotion? Do you wake up despairing? Do you wake up with a degree of anxiety, fear? Do you wake up with an element of anger? What is it that you feel when you wake up in the morning? Become aware of that. Observe that feeling. He also talked about the fact that, we at night, we should go back and, go through our day visually. But we can also think, what negative emotions? Did I lose my temper? Did I get despairing? Did I want to die? Did I want to? And we can begin to analyze the emotional content in terms of our negative emotions. Throughout our day. We can also do, and the emotions, this is very important, because our chief fault, our chief feature, that chief dark nexus around which our personality flows and rotates, is emotional. So trying to figure out our emotions is very important. And this is where Hamed has an advantage in one way, because of his studies of the Enneagram. And, as a Gurdjieffian, I have problems with the Enneagram and personality types. But I believe the Enneagram of personality types reflects a real deep truth, because they look at ourselves from an emotional perspective. So there are the triad, and the triad of emotions. And so I believe, a man number 9 or 8, 9, and 1, their dominant emotion is anger, either unexpressed, held in, or too much, or just right. I'm not sure, I'm just briefly going into that. So to figure out that, there are cheats in this process that we can begin to use, personality tests, the Myers-Briggs. Are we an introvert, extrovert? Are we a perceiving or judging? Are we a sensing or feeling? These can give us insights into ourselves and help us in terms of our self-observation. So that's just an aside. There are ways and tools that we have now that weren't available in Mr. Gurdjieff's day. We can go online. There are something like 5 major personality tests that you can take online, the Myers-Briggs, the Enneagram. There are a bunch of others that can give us insight into who we are, and we can begin to watch for certain characteristics within ourselves. This is something I would like to do in a future meeting. So getting back to the text, from the very beginning, observation or recording must be based upon the understanding of the fundamental principles of the activity of the human machine. Self-observation cannot be properly applied without knowing these principles, without constantly bearing them in mind. Therefore, ordinary self-observation in which all people are engaged all their lives is useless and leads nowhere. I can't believe they did that. No, I was such a fool then, and I can't believe how stupid I was. And I'm always, all that negative self-talk is not really observation. Even though there's a certain awareness, I can't believe I did that. I'm always doing that. How can I be such a loser? We're observing things, but we're not doing it in the right way. Observation must begin with the division of functions. All the activity of the human machine is divided into 4 sharply defined groups, each of which is controlled by its own special mind or center. In observing himself, a man must differentiate between the 4 basic functions of his machine: the thinking, the emotional, the moving, and the instinctive. And here, the moving and the instinctive are actually 2 parts of the physical center, but one is learned and the other's instinctive. So riding a bicycle is part of the moving center. The goosebumps that come when we're cold and we start shivering is part of the instinctive center. Every phenomenon that a man observes in himself is related to one or the other of these functions. Therefore, before beginning to observe, a man must understand how the functions differ, what intellectual activity means, what emotional activity means, what moving activity means, and what instinctive activity means. Observation must begin from the beginning. All previous experience, the results of all previous self-observation must be laid aside. They may contain much valuable material, but all this material is based upon wrong divisions of the functions observed and is itself wrongly divided. It cannot therefore be utilized. At any rate, it cannot be utilized at the beginning of the work of self-study. What is of value in it will, at the proper time, be taken up and made use of, but it is necessary to begin from the beginning. A man must begin observing himself as though he did not know himself at all, as though he had never observed himself. When he begins to observe himself, he must try to determine at once to what group, to which center belong the phenomenon he is observing at the moment. Some people find it difficult to understand the difference between thought and feeling. Others have difficulty in understanding the difference between feeling and sensation, between a thought and a moving impulse. Speaking on very broad lines, one must say that the thinking function always works by means of comparison. The intellectual conclusions are always the result of the comparison of 2 or more impressions. Sensation and emotion do not reason, do not compare. They simply define a given impression by its aspect, by its being pleasant or unpleasant, in one sense or another, by its color, taste, or smell. Moreover, sensations can be indifferent. neither warm nor cold, neither pleasant nor unpleasant, white paper, red pencil. In the sensation of white or red, there is nothing either pleasant or unpleasant. At any rate, there need not necessarily be anything pleasant or unpleasant connected with this or that color. These sensations, the so-called five senses, and others, like the feeling of warmth, cold, and so on, are instinctive. Feeling functions or emotions are always pleasant or unpleasant. Indifferent emotions do not exist. So here he's talking about dividing our observations. The mind, the intellectual center, always compares. The intellectual center is very binary, yes, no. It's a comparison of two things. The same with the emotional center. The emotional center is binary, but in a different way. It's binary in terms of pleasant and unpleasant. Whereas the instinctive center, the awareness of the square of the screen is part of the instinctive center. The awareness of the touch of clothing on your body is part of the instinctive center. The awareness of movement is part of the moving center. There's an aspect of linguistics, there's an aspect of speaking that is very much moving centered involved. The words, the shape of the words in my mouth, the use of my voice, and all of that are part and parcel of the moving center. When bicycles became popular, Mr. Gurdjieff went out and bought something like 50 bicycles for members at the Prieuré, because there's not a lot of opportunity for adults to have to, again, master elements of the moving center. Going and taking martial arts, going and trying to learn how to surf or skateboard or do something different. You will learn, the moving center, how it learns things. So to observe the way you walk, to observe your gait, to observe the various muscles involved in talking, the way it resonates with the vocal cord, all of that, those are all also parts of the moving center. So we've got to begin to make these observations and learn to differentiate what part of us do they come from. He didn't talk about the formatory apparatus, but whenever we're caught up in the words in our mind, the automatic flow of words, we're caught in the formatory center of our head brain. So you can go, there I was in the formatory center. There I was just stuck in that churning of the words. So we can do this in many different ways. But to begin to, whatever our observations, to note where they belong. Do they belong to this category or do they belong to that category? Any comments? Any questions? Any observations?
I have a question about physical pain. Not necessarily major pain, but just, oh, my back's a little stiff or whatever. There's definitely an aspect of pleasant and unpleasant in there, but it also feels like it's mainly sensation, or I don't know. That's kind of my question. Like, is there an emotional aspect on top? How do we kind of observe that and differentiate that?
Well, I know that, in terms of the work I do, I use a slightly different vocabulary. We talk about pain and suffering. So this is not suffering in the Gurdjieffian sense. Pain is the shock we feel when we have static electricity in the wintertime, at least in Canada, and we touch a metal door handle, we get zapped. There's the experience of pain. Suffering, we talk about as the anticipation of getting zapped. So as we bring our hand to the close to the door, it's like, oh my God, am I going to get zapped this time? And one would be, to me, one is more emotional, the fear of being zapped. The actual aspect of pain, if you can separate it from the suffering, if you can separate it from the emotional content, it's just pain. There have been, there have been people who've had strokes in the part of their brain that prevent them from that anticipation of the pain, and it just kind of happens and it's gone. There's none of the emotional connection. So I think pain, and the way you're describing it, is partly coming from the instinctual center and partly clouded by the emotional center. So the revulsion, or the, it's like the pain triggers an emotional response, and the emotional center works at a much quicker rate than the intellectual center. So they may seem to be conjoined and together, but if you begin to notice them, there's a slight difference. Is it pleasant or unpleasant? That feeling of pain is unpleasant, but it does, the actual experience of pain, that physical pain is the instinctive center, but the emotional dimension, is it pleasant or unpleasant, is emotional. Ahmed, you had a question, did you?
Yep. One of my teachers told me that there is a difference between feeling, which is present moment, and emotions, which comes from the past, things that happened already in the past.
Okay.
So can we distinguish between them, feelings and
again, this is going more to my training as a hypnotherapist than a therapist. From the scientific perspective, with clinical psychologists and people involved in the study of emotion, a feeling is my internal perception. So I'm feeling angry right now, whereas an emotion is something that can be observed from outside. So you can hook someone up to electrodes and galvanic skin response and measure their blood pressure and whatever. And if you can observe it, you call it an emotion. What we're able to see from the outside, you look angry, is an emotion, but a feeling is what we feel inside. Now, your teacher said that a feeling is what we feel in this moment, and an emotion. So when you feel angry, that's the snapshot you're taking in this moment, whereas the emotion of anger is the history of all the snapshots you take. Can you, is that, I mean, that's Iman trying to get back to me, but I've got to, can you just explain that a little bit more? Oops.
I mean, feeling angry about what's happening in the current moment, in the present moment, is a little bit different from recalling an incident from the past that brings anger to the current moment. You know what I mean? So feelings is the anger right now, something that is happening right now. But emotions is recalling, or not having the acceptance, or not forgetting something that happened yesterday or the week before, and I'm bringing it. I'm bringing myself into a state of melancholy and a state of like, as if now I'm recalling that emotion to the present moment.
I mean, the thing about, if I recall how angry I was last week, The only way I can recall that is to recall the emotion within myself. This is something, they teach in hypnosis and NLP, linguistic programming. So that feeling that you felt last week, can you talk about, what that was? And they will begin to re-experience that feeling here and now in this present moment. So in hypnosis, we talk about, in terms of feelings, we talk about states, processes, and experiences. So there's the state of anger, which is feeling angry. And there's actually a process. If we pay attention to our physical body, we do not all experience anger in the same place. I mean, we're different machines, how we learn anger. One person may feel it in their chest, another in their fist, another in their face. That's the process. So, and there's a way it builds up in our body. In hypnosis, we go back and, I want you to recall a moment you felt really angry. And where did you notice this feeling first in your body? Then where did the feeling go to in your body? Then where did it go? And we can actually trace this feeling circuit in the body, which is a form of self-observation. So we can, there are tools and ways that we can facilitate self-observation through psychotherapy and hypnosis and various things. So the state, which is the state of anger, there's the process, which is how anger grows in our body until we're angry, and there is the experience, and the experience is the memory of being angry. But all of these, like the law of three, all of them are contained within each other. One cannot exist without the other. So when I ask you to go back and recall a time in your past when you really experienced real anger, your body will go through the physiological process. It starts in the heart, moves to the throat, and then the big muscles, or however it manifests, and it's different for different people. And then that will put us in the state of anger. So my understanding, I guess, is slightly different than your teacher's. When your teacher's talking about an emotion, she's talking about the memory of a moment of anger, the experience, this difference between the state, the process, and the experience. So by recalling the experience of anger, we trigger the process of anger, and we can enter into the angry state. In order to, in hypnosis, we talk about, we take our clients back and see what you saw, hear what you heard, sense the sensations in your body, feel the feelings, and we bring the emotion up that way, knowing that if we recall that moment as fully as we can, we have to enter into that feeling state here and now in the present moment. But we can also slow it down through hypnosis. And where did you feel that feeling first? Profound self-observation. Then where did it go? Then where did it go? So we can become aware of the circuit involved. And then we can begin to, the more of those snapshots, the more aware we are of them, how it manifests in our body, we're able to actually get slightly in front of ourselves. Mr. Gurdjieff says that we have to separate ourselves from ourselves. When we can get slightly in front of ourselves, just before we get angry, and we get angry, we begin to observe these processes more. But this is a little more complex. I'm a little bit further down the road. Did I answer your question, Ahmed, or I guess your microphone's turned off?
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Try to observe yourself. Right now, your facial muscles. It's amazing how a lot of our emotions are held in our face. Disgust, anger, fear, disappointment. I realized someone gave me a wonderful opportunity to observe myself about a week and a half ago. We were going to do something together that would have had a real benefit for me and had a real benefit for them. But time constraints on their part, it would have been too much for them. And suddenly realizing disappointment and noticing, and I'd never really paid attention to disappointment. I had a lot of other emotions, like layers of emotions, like peeling an onion, layers of onions, depression, anxiety, despair. I had never focused on the feeling of disappointment. And in that moment when they said that, they couldn't do it, and time constraints, I was able to observe this feeling of disappointment. And it was really in the muscles in my face. It was like an insincere smile. And it was, I have to thank that person. All the preliminary stuff that we did, the talking that we did, the possibilities, were really, for me, just a precursor to really observe that emotional state in myself. I normally do not put myself in situations where I feel disappointed. I'm normally very much, if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. Que sera, sera, whatever will be, will be. And very rarely do I engage in this kind of behavior where I create a false sense of hope and I start planning things out in my mind. And that observation to me was priceless. It was priceless to realize where I held it in my body, particularly in my face, was just extraordinary. It's an emotion that I don't normally experience because I've just learned to live more in the moment and not to expect things and not to allow myself to get carried away with anything. And in this moment, I was actually allowing myself to get slightly carried away with something. I was thinking, yes, this can work into what I'm doing. This can be a real benefit to the work that I'm doing. And, I had built it up in my mind. And so in that moment, the disappointment, feeling it in my face. If you get angry, where do you notice the anger in your body? Where does it manifest? If you feel despair, a lot of that's in our face. Disgust. Disgust is actually very connected to our sense of smell. They say the emotion of disgust actually has a connection to smelling putrid and rotten foods. It was a way of like, ooh, if you smell something rancid, something rotten, not only is there the smell, the instinctive part of ourselves, that smell of it, but there is the emotional content, the disgust, which is an emotion, and that disgust has been generalized. So we can experience disgust when we think of other human beings, or we see something on the news, or something that's completely unrelated to a rancid smell. And then so that emotion gets separated from the initial place where it arose, but we can still observe it, particularly in our face. Like it's like when and you can see this in other people, and other people can become mirrors. This is something I may talk about in another meeting, but I will end this meeting with this. Mr. Gurdjieff said that one of the ways we can tap into the evolving part of air is to walk a mile in someone else's shoes. And in other words, to step into another person's reality. And something that I like doing is within my own face. I like observing people on the bus, at the park bench, on the subway, walking down the street, and observing their faces. And then putting my face into the same position to observe the feeling that arises in my body. So if they're like this, or if they're smiling, and to notice that my feeling circuit is in my body, it's contained within my body. I feel my emotions in my body. And so walking down and looking at other people and trying to play inside myself with the look on their face, with the way they're holding their face in order to observe the inner emotion that this draws up. So disgust has a certain look. Anger has a certain look, and it expresses itself on the muscles of our face. It's a wonderful tool for really observing other people, for observing our own emotions. And later on, when we start to, oh, that's disgust in me, we have these impressions, these snapshots within ourselves. Just very quickly, we've got about another 3 minutes. Any other questions, comments, observations? So observe yourself this week. Really pay attention. When you notice things, is it sensation? Is it just color, form, shape? Hot, cold, those are instinctive functions. Pleasant, unpleasant, those are emotions. Comparison. So, you know, this apple compared to that apple, which one should I put in my cart? Is an intellectual comparison. This person, that person, this thought, that thought. Just try to pay attention to these things and try to categorize and look at ourselves this way. Ahmed, yes.
Would it be useful? I've heard that in some Gurdjieff groups they put a stone in the shoe or something, or a coin or something that's unnormal, so that it serves as an anchor to remind themselves of they have to pay attention, that they have to be. Would it be useful for?
Of course, that's useful. I mean, that's not quite what we're talking about in terms of self-observation. By putting a stone in your shoe, it's like, remember yourself, remember yourself, remember yourself. It's what Mr. Gurdjieff called a reminding factor. So when you walk, it reminds you to pay attention to your walking, to pay attention to the way you're moving. So yeah, it's a very good idea to do those. I mean, there are many other different forms of reminding factors that we can, but that's a really simple one that everyone can do. Just put a stone in their shoe, and it brings you back to the awareness of yourself walking. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, it's noon. Thank you very much. Same time next week. And observe yourself and try, and we will start next meeting asking for, I'll ask for some of your observations and what you've noticed. And I posted this in the Facebook group, and when I put the video up, I'll post the text that I just quoted in the video description, so those who are watching can also do this. Okay, take care. Bye now.
Alan,